How does witnessing the murder of your own mother end up solving 2 cases? In April of 1993, an episode of Unsolved Mysteries came on the TV. It talked about a woman named Dee Dee Rosenthal who had went missing on February 22nd of 1991. Dee Dee was a part of a trained staff who worked with autistic children. At 4:47 p.m., she came home from work, withdrew money from the ATM, and talked to a friend on a phone that evening, and then went back to her apartment complex in Somerset Towers in Cherry Hill. And since that day, no one had heard from her. And her case went completely cold. That was until 14-year-old Jennifer Wirtz had convinced her killer to come forward in 1995. Because Dee Dee's killer had also murdered her mom. Jennifer reached out to me and let me know her entire story. So let's get into the case of Rebecca Wirtz. So Rebecca was born in 1952, and growing up she was a big fan of music and loved the Beatles and Billy Joel. And when she got older, she met a high-ranking sergeant in the military, and together they had 4 girls: Shannon, Colleen, Kim, and Jennifer. Since her dad was stationed at the Pentagon, he was away a lot. So they got a divorce when Jennifer was 4, but this is when things went downhill. So after Jennifer's parents got a divorce, her mom moved in with her grandparents. So her sisters, her uncle, her and her grandparents, and her mom were all in the same house. While she doesn't remember a lot during this time, she does remember her sisters having a better relationship with her mom, although they were really able to connect on music. But Rebecca started to go out, go to bars, go to friends' houses, and she ended up meeting a guy named Charles Edward Reddish, who went by the name Ed. Rebecca took them home to meet her parents, and they immediately did not approve of Ed. But Rebecca still wanted to be with him. And her ex-husband had an extra house that wasn't far from her parents. And while he didn't live there, he did let them move in. And this way, Rebecca could keep bringing Ed over. Jennifer remembers really liking Ed at first. He would bring toys, he would color with her, and she just wasn't getting that same attention from her mom. However, her sisters did not have the same reaction towards Ed. Well, Ed was a maintenance man at an apartment complex, and both Jennifer and her mom would drive over and start to stay with him at Somerset Towers in Cherry Hill. This is when the red flag started. Jennifer noticed some weird things about Ed's apartment. No furniture, no food, but she still had a lot of fun going over there because there was a lot of other kids in the complex, and there was a playground and a pool where she could hang out with them. But Rebecca started to leave Jennifer alone with Ed, and this is how a lot of the abuse went unnoticed. And Ed would constantly make up for it by buying her stuff like Cabbage Patch dolls, and eventually Jennifer went to Rebecca telling her mom about the assaults. But her mom just told her that she was having a nightmare, but also told her not to bring it up with her grandparents, so she kind of knew that her mom knew it wasn't a nightmare. And one day they were going out to Pemberton to visit Ed's uncle, and during this he snuck her away, telling her that he was going to go get her a Happy Meal, abused her, and then tried to strangle her out in the middle of these farm fields. Jennifer ended up talking Ed out of killing her, and she tried to express what happened to her mom, but her mom just really wouldn't listen, and kind of honestly blamed her. But she just thought that her mom was probably brainwashed or scared. And this goes on for several more years. Eventually, her sister Kimmy ends up finding out and goes to confront the mom about leaving Ed. So Kimmy threatens the mom, saying that she's going to get custody over Jennifer if she doesn't leave Ed. So Rebecca agreed it was time, and they created a plan together. After school, Jennifer was going to play her last hockey game, and Rebecca was going to pick her up with a loaded car. But eventually, after school, when the car came, Ed was driving it. Her mom walked out and said, "Let's just go home and have dinner." Jennifer was honestly so upset at that point. She went home, went upstairs, went to bed. And her mom tried to wake her up that night, but she told her mom to leave her alone. And the second time she woke up that night, it was 2 very horrific noises. She ran to the stairs to find that her own mother was being beaten by Ed. Rebecca visibly had a broken jaw and a broken arm, and Jennifer was just screaming at Ed to stop. And she remembers his eyes being black and enraged like she had never seen before. And he was talking straight gibberish, so she thought he was probably on something. He ended up taking her and setting her next to her mom, and she was hoping that her mom would look over and see her, but she never did. This is when Ed grabbed a hatchet and threw a blanket over Jennifer. Rebecca was murdered 3 feet from her daughter. After Ed had murdered Jennifer, whatever he had taken was starting to wear off, and he started to come up with plans to unalive himself. And literally at the age of 14, Jennifer talks to him about how he could take a plea deal with the police, telling him that if he turns himself in, he may not have to stay in jail for very long, or even plead insanity. And after about 5 hours of him holding her hostage, he actually agrees to this. So he calls his mom, and his mom calls the cops saying that there needs to be a welfare check and that someone might be hurt. So when the police got there, they were not prepared for the scene that they were about to see. They showed up and asked Ed if an ambulance was needed, and he said it was way too late for that. Jennifer was taken straight to the hospital, and she was brought new clothes since all of her clothing and everything was considered evidence, and her sister came to claim her. Well, Ed was then brought in to be interrogated. And as protocol, you're supposed to ask if you've ever done this before, and the detective was already writing down no whenever he said yes. He had killed someone at his apartment complex, and it aired on Unsolved Mysteries. So you're probably wondering, why did he admit to this? Well, he was hoping that he wouldn't get the death penalty. Dee Dee was a 31-year-old woman who had moved to Canada to work with autistic children, and he was the maintenance man in the building she moved into. He got into her window, assaulted her, and then smothered her. He put her in a tarp and loaded Dee Dee into Rebecca's car. And he said that he dumped her body around Salem County, but Jennifer believes that she's probably buried at his uncle's property, this spot where she was almost murdered at. The sad truth is that Dee Dee's family passed away never really knowing where her body was, and they never got that full closure. Jennifer moved in with her older sister Shannon, and for the most part says she lived a pretty normal teenage life. She went to high school, got on the cheerleading squad, and had a really good group of friends. And her sisters really kept her accountable for her grades, her attitude, and ultimately did not let Ed win. She testified in 1999, and Ed is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And she's now a mom of 2 girls. She's linked below if you want to say hi, and I'll have an extended version of this true crime on my YouTube. Go check it out.